Hello, my name is Peter Dale. I'm on the board of directors of Heart for Change here in Colombia. I'd like to give you a warm welcome today to this webinar. As you might tell from my accent, I'm from the United Kingdom, but I've been living in Colombia for more than 20 years, with a brief pause in the middle in Mexico. So I know this country very well as a foreigner and almost as a local now. So I'm going to be your guide for this brief introduction to the country today. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you will enjoy the country when you're here for your time as a fellow in the Heart for Change program. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit of an overview of the country. So as you can tell from the map, Colombia is in the north point of South America. Sometimes people talk about Latin America, which includes Mexico and Central America, or South America, which basically starts with Venezuela, as you can see on that map, and ends at the bottom with Argentina and Chile. So just to give you an overview of South America, there are 5 countries, which were Panama, Bogota, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Peru, that at one time were all part of the same country called the Gran Colombia. That was over 200 years ago. So at one point, when the great liberator, who was called Simón Bolívar, his great dream was to create one single country, this Gran Colombia. But he wasn't able to do that. So they were all eventually became 5 independent countries. Colombia is the largest of those countries in the north of South America. Brazil is the biggest country in the region. In Bogota, Spanish is spoken. In fact, the only country that doesn't speak Spanish in the region is Brazil. So as you can also see, we'll talk about that in a minute, we have 2 seas, to the west coast, as you see, which is the Pacific Ocean, and the north coast, where you can see Barranquilla, Cartagena, Santa Marta. That's the Caribbean, which becomes part of the Atlantic. So I'm just going to give you a few general facts about Colombia, just as an introduction. I don't know if any of you come from Europe. Here they talk about Europe as the old continent, and it's old not just in that it has it's been around for many more centuries than Latin America. It's also old because it's got an aging population. Colombia, like many countries in Latin America, has a very young population. So more than half of the population is under 30 years old. You're going to see that the future of the country is in those kids that you're going to be teaching in the schools. So there is a great future in store for Colombia because they're going to be the working population in a few years' time. Bogota, as you see, is the biggest city, but there are 9 cities that are medium to large size. So medium, we're saying over 500,000 people. We'll look in a minute, what those cities are, and we'll talk a little bit about them. So in terms of size, 3 times the size of California, twice the size of Texas, about 3 times the size of the United Kingdom. I know that because I come from there. So you've got huge, if you look at that, the map again in the middle, there are huge extensions of the country where very few people live. You see the bottom there with a little point, that section there is all the Amazon jungle. So there are people living there. You see there's a picture of tribes there. So there are some indigenous tribes, but we're talking about a few thousand people in the huge land extents. And on the east, where that lady is in the pink dress, there's a huge plains, the eastern plains, which border on Venezuela. And again, very, very few people live in that part of the country. Now, one of the wonderful things about Colombia And this is one of the reasons why Colombia is growing as a tourist destination, is its biodiversity. Per kilometer, it has more, it's the most diverse country in the whole world. And it's only second to Brazil in terms of numbers of fauna and flora. So when you come to Colombia, you can going to see a huge variation of fruits, of vegetables, of animals, of climates. It's going to be an amazing experience. And part of the experience is traveling around the country, because you have very many microclimates. So you could be in the north, you could be in the west, and you have a specific microclimate with specific species. And then you move a few hundred kilometers and you get a totally different climate. So within one single country, you've got this huge diversity. Another thing that makes it unique is that it's the only country in South America with access to both those oceans. Now, Colombia has had a tough recent past. Everyone knows about the Pablo Escobar, the drug trafficking, the cartels, the violence, the very few tourists would come to Colombia in the 80s and the 90s. And that affected the country economically as well. So in the 80s and 90s, it was a very much undeveloped country. But there have been huge changes over the last 10 years. And some of those changes we can see in the economic performance. So in terms of GDP, there's been a recent growth of more than 4%, much higher than the Latin American average, and much higher than the world average. Well, we've got the States, Europe, much low growth rates. So Colombia has become a booming country. Other indices are inflation rate, well below 4%, unemployment rate, which seems relatively high. It's going down 8%, now it's less than 8%, 7.7%. One thing you must understand when you're going to find that out when you come to Colombia is there is a huge informal market. So many people who are officially unemployed do work. They work in informal jobs. So they could be in the street, they could be in factories, they could be on the land. They're not formally employed, they're not formally paying taxes, but very few people are actually idle. So people, one of the key things you're going to find in Colombia, it's a very, very hard-working country. One of the things that may be a shock to your system when you get here is the typical working day in Colombia. At 6 o'clock in the morning here in Bogota, it's one of the busiest times of the day. So you've got thousands of people on the streets, millions of people on the streets, buses running, cars, people walking, everyone setting off at that time or earlier to go and work. So a typical working day might be from 7 o'clock in the morning till 4 or 5 o'clock. Some people work later. But it's very much an early bird society. Very different from the Spanish who colonized Colombia. One of the things that didn't last here was the Spanish system, which is very much starting late and finishing late. One of the key reasons for economic boom until this year has been oil production. So it's the third largest producer in South America, and that's helped the economic growth. This year, obviously, that's going to be hit because the oil prices dropped, coal prices have dropped, so the growth rate is probably going to be less than 4% this year. But in general, these are times of great economic achievements. So when the international organizations like Moody's, Standards & Poor's look at different countries in terms of investment, Colombia has been getting better. So stable, positive. These international analysts like the way that Colombia has been managing its economy, like the way that they avoid large government debt, and obviously like the constant economic improvement. So there is a big positive outlook that we could look at in terms of Colombia. But one of the things that's limiting the growth of Colombia is the lack of English. Colombia has signed a series of free trade agreements with Canada, the European Community, and these trade agreements mean that to do business with other countries, you've got to have a high level of English. But unfortunately, Colombia hasn't. It's been relatively isolated, specifically with this in the economic depression times. Very few people invested. There was very little access to foreigners. English teaching in schools was very poor, very limited. So it's estimated that only around 2% of Colombians really speak a decent English. So that's just one of the reasons why Colombia is now investing in bilingual programs. And one of the bilingual programs is obviously the one that you're going to be working with. So that's just a little bit of background, economic background. Where is Colombia today? As I mentioned before, Colombia as a tourist destination, despite having an amazing country, was very limited. There's a figure that around 15 years ago, there were only 5,000 visitors from the US. Now there are 500,000 visitors a year. That's in the space of 10 to 15 years. So the change has been amazing in terms of tourism. So getting to know Colombia is an amazing experience. So the landscapes are amazing. I mentioned the climates, the different climates. The people, many tourists who come to Colombia and say afterwards, what you most liked about the country? And they say, the people. So one of the great things is that you're here for a long period of time. You're going to have the chance to discover many of these options. So many of these options could be in the town or city that you're working in, what's near your town and city, or on weekends or brief holidays, you can fly. There's lots of low-cost flight options within the country, so you can get to know many different parts of the country. That picture there is a good example of what was a totally undiscovered Colombia just a few years ago. That area was in a guerrilla-controlled country, so it was impossible to visit up to about 5-6 years ago. That's called Caño Cristales, or the River of Seven Colors. It's a natural phenomenon. Those colors that you see there are actually from the vegetation, weeds within the water, but they have amazing, unique colors. And now this is a thriving tourist destination that many people are visiting, both Colombians and international tourists. I recommend you look at the Colombia Travel webpage and the YouTube channel. There are lots of different videos that you can look at on that official webpage, and there are many other web pages where you can find out about tourism in Colombia. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the key destinations. But first of all, it's Colombia, not Colombia. This is one of the things that really annoys Colombians, and we who live in Colombia and get emails from outside, or if we see articles about the country, we constantly see people spelling it wrong. So you must get it right. So one way to remember it is that Colombia has two O's because it's got two oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic. So that's probably the easiest way to remember it. Two O's, Colombia, because of the two oceans. So these two oceans are very different in terms of tourism. The North Coast, which is the Caribbean, which then becomes the Atlantic, is traditional tourist territory. Even when foreign tourists weren't coming to Colombia, it was still a big national destination for tourism. And on the North Coast, the key cities are Cartagena and Santa Marta. And then outside, beyond the coast, in the Caribbean Sea, there's an island that belongs to Colombia called San Andres. Those are typical sun and beach holiday destinations, and thousands of people enjoy, in Santa Marta, for example, sunny beaches, very good hotels. As a contrast, on the Pacific coast, that's generally unspoiled territory, and it's a different kind of wilder tourism. Just one place there is Nuquí on the Pacific coast. Others are called Bahía Solano. There's an island called Gorgona, which used to be a prison, but is now a tourist destination. So on the west coast, you've got surfing, you've got very quiet beaches, more of ecotourism, whereas on the north coast, you've got more traditional sun and beach and cultural historical tourism. The natural place to start our tour of Colombia is the capital city. So, as in most countries, the capital is also the largest city of the country, with over 8 million inhabitants. Now, just to give you an idea of the growth of Bogota, back in 1940, it had 400,000 inhabitants. In the 50s, 1 million inhabitants. So, in a little over 60 years, it's grown from 1 million to 8 million people. So that's an incredible growth, an incredible change, and incredible challenges for this big city. And today, it's still growing. Today, Bogota is undertaking another transformation. It was a city that was mainly houses. Now many of those houses, not these houses that you see on this picture because they're protected, because they have historical value, but houses that were built in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s are being pulled down, and blocks of flats, of commercial buildings are being built to replace them because there's limited space and there's many more people. So the only way is to go up rather than out. So just to go back to how Bogota started, Bogota was not the first city to be founded in Colombia because it's right towards the middle of the country. And it took a long time for the Spanish conquerors to get to the center. So the first Spanish leader was called Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada. They were looking around through the Colombian territory, looking for a place that they thought would be good to found a city on. They found this city, which you might think is too high, too cold, but they found a place that was on the edge of the mountain that had a wonderful view of the valley, what we call the savannah, in front of it, and was protected at the back from attack by the Andes Mountains. So they created what was then a little village, obviously in the Spanish style, and that today, the base of that area is called La Candelaria, the historic center. And that's probably a great starting point to find out about the history of Colombia and to explore Bogota, because in the center you've got the cathedral, you've got the main square, you've got the government buildings, you've got many museums, and you've got these wonderful buildings, which some are from what they call the colonial period. The Spanish colony was from the early 16th century. Bogota was founded in around 1530 until 1810, when Colombia became an independent nation. So there are still some colonial buildings, and then there are colonial style buildings which were built in the 19th century, but in the same style as the buildings built when the Spanish were here. So Colombia became independent finally in 1819, after about 9 years of struggle against the Spanish. So has been an independent nation for around 200 years. Now, one thing that we're going to show you in this presentation is some of the typical food from the different areas of Colombia. Now, in Bogota, the most famous dish is the one on the left, which is called ajiaco. You can see that the J is pronounced almost as an H, ajiaco. And that is a thick soup that has 3 or 4 different types of potato, chicken, capers that you can see in that picture, sweet corn. And that's a hearty soup that's eaten as a main course. And it's typical of Bogota, because Bogota, for the rest of Colombia standards, is cold. When we talk about cold, the coldest it gets is about 3 degrees centigrade on the coldest nights. During the day, typically it's between 13 and 20 degrees centigrade. On the right, again, another typical food for cold evenings is called chocolate santafereño. So chocolate is, the cocoa plant is indigenous to Colombia, and it's one of the typical drinks. And what's strange to foreigners, at least, is that when you drink chocolate, you put cheese in it. So that cheese there is put inside the chocolate and melts into the chocolate. And you typically eat it with different kinds of bread. So Bogota is in the middle of a high plain called the Savannah, 2,600 meters above sea level. The Andes Mountains split into 3 when they come to Colombia. So the Savannah is between 2 of those 2 sections of the Andes Mountains. So when you're in Bogota, if the mountains are on your right, the mountains are on the east, and you're looking north. So one of the great things about in Bogota, you can never get lost, because you always know from the position of the mountains where you are. And as you can see from that photograph, it's beautiful green landscape around the capital. So within 10-15 minutes, you can go out of the city in a beautiful green countryside. Many small towns and villages that you can explore. The 2 regions around Bogota are Cundinamarca and Boyacá. One of the great tourist attractions just half an hour outside Bogota is a salt cathedral in a place called Zipaquirá, where you're going to be in your training when you get to Bogota. So just 5 minutes away from the hotel where you're going to be doing your training, there's this amazing underground cathedral which was built inside a salt mine. So that's at the center of that, in that photograph is at the center of that cathedral. So that's one of the great wonders of Colombia. Medellin is not the main capital. It's got over 2 million inhabitants, but obviously much smaller than Bogota. But for the Heart for Change program, at the moment it's the main city. It's where we've got more fellows in Medellin than any other city. The people who live there in Medellin are called paisas. That's the name, and they're very, very proud. So that's one of the things that you're going to find when you live and work in Medellin, is that the local people are very proud of their heritage. Here are just 2 typical pictures of this city. Botero is a famous painter and sculptor, Fernando Botero. He's famous for his fat portraits of fat people, fat animals, and that's both in the paintings and the sculptures. So that's one you can see there on the horse. And then the Paisas are rightly proud of their metro system. So that's an example there. It's the only city in Colombia with a metro system. They're also proud of their food. Here's just a couple of dishes. On the left is probably the emblematic dish of Medellin. It's called bandeja paisa. It's very, very filling. So there you can see the ingredients, rice, avocado, beans, very fine mince meat, beef at the bottom, fried egg, crackling, and fried plantain, sweet plantain, and a tomato sauce. So that is the typical dish. You find it in Medellin, but you can find it all over the country. And then on the right, these are arepas. In Medellin, they don't really eat much bread. They eat instead these arepas. And they can be plain, or they can have cheese, or on the coast they have eggs in them. These are typical. They can be eaten by themselves, or they can be eaten to accompany other dishes. Cali, similar size to Medellin, more than 2 million inhabitants. This is a more tropical city. It's got a much bigger Afro-descendant population, and partly because of that, it's famous for dance. In recent years, it's become the center of salsa. And there are many, many different performances. There are salsa schools on every corner. So the people who are going to Cali definitely take advantage to learn salsa. But wherever you are in Colombia, you'll get the chance to learn it because it's a real phenomenon in recent years. But the best salsa is definitely danced in Cali. On the left, you see that they don't have a metro, but they have a transport system, pretty new system called Mio. And in Bogota, they have a similar system called Transmilenio. In Cali, most frequent dishes are a soup, which is called sancocho de gallina criolla. So that's got chicken, potato, plantain, and yuca, amongst other ingredients. Similar to the ajiaco in Bogota, very, very filling. And on the right, what they call pan de bono, which is made of with flour and cheese, cheesy bread. So the bread, the word for bread is pan, P-A-N, but in Cali they call it pam. That's the way to pronounce it. Now, the number one tourist destination in Colombia, Bogota gets more visitors, but tourists who are looking for a holiday, Cartagena is the number one destination. And it's clear from these and many other pictures that it's why it is. It's got an amazing walled city. You can see on the left, declared a World Heritage Site in 1984. And it's just an amazing experience to walk around those streets. But it's also got beaches. So it's got the walled city, and it's got popular beaches where you can buy fruit from the local people and enjoy the warm Caribbean Ocean. Not far from Cartagena, just around half an hour away, is Santa Marta, the oldest city in Colombia, the second oldest in South America. It's famous for its beaches. So these are a couple of the quiet beaches. One on the left is in the Parque Tayrona, which is not far from Santa Marta. It's a great ecological destination. So you can camp there, you can sleep in lodges. And on the right, it's the white sandy beaches near the center of Santa Marta itself. So this is again a top tourism destination, both for national and international tourists. Colombia obviously is famous for its coffee. and the main region that produces coffee are the departments of Quindío, Risaralda, and Caldas. And many of the fellows are going to be in those cities, Armenia, Pereira, and Manizales. So you're going to enjoy, as well as fresh coffee, some amazing scenery. At the other end of the country, on the south point, bordering on Peru and Brazil, is the city of Leticia. So the whole of the Amazon, there are very, very few people living there. But in this one little city, it's now a few 100,000 people live there. So it's grown over recent years, and it's a base for tourism, for ecotourism in the jungle and on the river. So the river there could be 1 or 2 miles wide near Leticia. I mentioned the Pacific coast. So despite, as well as the quiet beaches, you've got amazing experiences such as watching for dolphins in certain times of the year, not all year, and for adventurous people surfing. So that's a real picture of surfing from the Pacific coast of Colombia. Another region that's great for adventure sports is Santander. So that's northeast of Bogota. It's inland. So you've got a great combination for holidays of rafting, rappel, and other adventure sports, and also these amazing colonial towns and villages. The one on the left there is called Barichara. And near Bogota, there's an area of the department of Boyacá, which has a combination of dry and green scenery, beautiful towns and villages. The most famous town there is Villa de Leyva. That's the central square in Villa de Leyva. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this very quick introduction to Colombia. I'm sure you're going to have a great time when you get here. So explore more websites, explore guidebooks. There's a lot more to learn. This is just a quick overview, but I really hope you enjoy your time here. Thanks.